go to state.
Hi, I'm Helen Novarenko, and this is Go to the State. This podcast is about how governments change in the digital age and about people building that change. Today, we're talking about why proving who we are becomes so difficult the moment we cross a border and whether digital identity can change that. My guests today are Yuliia Kravchenko, who is a GovStack Lead for Digital Wallet, legal expert in digital governance and interoperability, and a researcher at TalTech in Estonia. Hi, Yuliia. Nice to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me.
And as always, Oleksandr Iefremov, who is the CEO of Kitsoft, a Ukrainian GovTech company that builds an infrastructure behind DIA, Ukraine's digital public services platform. Oleksandr, welcome to Go to the State.
Hi, Helen. Hi, Yuliia. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me here.
So, starting today, I would like probably to propose you a simple thought experiment. Imagine tomorrow you lose every physical document you own. What becomes difficult first, personally for you? Yuliia, what do you think?
I think if I lost everything, the first thing I would think about is driving, because then it would become a bit complicated to explain to a policeman why I don't have the document. But it very much depends on the personal use case. If there are some documents that person needs on everyday basis to prove themselves, let's say they go to the bank tomorrow and they need to confirm they are who they are for a loan or just a simple withdrawal, I think that would be very problematic for the person, especially in the a banking institution. Or the person again tomorrow needs to go and get those new documents because they lost all of them. Confirming your identity would be very challenging, I think, at this stage. Since you have to go through all the processes and again proving to the state and other entities who you are without having the physical credential.
Definitely. Imagine being in a foreign country in the same time whatsoever. You have to rush to your, nearest point of contact for your own country in that country. Oleksandr, what about you?
As a businessman, I of course need always proof of my identity in different ways. When we sign contracts, when we apply for bids, or like physical person, the same that Yuliia mentioned, or otherwise I travel abroad a lot and I need to cross the border, which is impossible without proper documents. So yeah, I need it every time. And of course, it's very easy to lose them and very hard to reissue. So it's one of use cases where digital identity could help us to fix this problem.
I absolutely agree. Let's maybe build up on identity itself. Yuliia, question to you. What do you think people usually underestimate about having an identity? What parts of our identity actually matter compared to others? Because of course everything is important, but some things are definitely more important than others.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I think it very much depends who you ask this question to. For me, I feel like most of the people overestimate the actual credential part of the identity, because when we define digital identity, we usually talk about two different parts. The first one is the credential, so your physical document, passport, ID, and so on, but also the attributes that are attached to that, right? So this can be anything from your name, surname, age, your education, and so on. So for usage, you of course think of this credential part, the physical thing. But the most important part of it is actually those attributes that are hidden behind, whether they're in the registry or some entity has them, or just everything that any other entity, public or private, has about you. So in the end, when people think of digital identity, they sometimes forget that it's not only the chip in your card or your phone or your wallet, digital identity wallet, but it's rather all these credentials that are hidden behind that, on top of the fact that the trust infrastructure as well is incredibly important for digital identity. You cannot have a digital identity without a trusted infrastructure behind it. Of course, this is not something that person thinks on a regular basis about, but it is an incredibly important part of it for any use case, for any situation in your life, essentially.
Thanks, Yulia. Actually, now question to Alexander based on what you just said. Basically, everybody lost a document in their life, definitely. And usually it's like 7 rounds of hell before you can actually prove who you are even to your own government. And my question to you, Alexander, would be about other governments. Well, first you work with them, and can you please explain us why proving who you are to a foreign country is still so difficult, right? Why governments can simply just trust existing documents shared by other governments based on, I don't know, whatever diplomatic relationships and everything that there is in terms of internal credential systems, if they're especially shared even between European countries, it's still the matter. So tell us, please.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue. Of course, there is now some infrastructure already built, and it's like using passports, chips in these passports. But generally, it's about political trust. So not all the countries trust each other. There are wars, obviously, conflicts, and it could be some malicious actors that even can forge the documents to attack other countries. So this is the issue. But I also would add that a lot of countries think about integrations in interoperability and this trust infrastructure inside the country, but not a lot of countries thought how to build it cross border. And we know that in European Union there is a OOTC project that solves this problem, trying to solve at least. Ukraine, by the way, also joined this OOTS initiative to have interoperability regarding documents issued in the countries and the member states. But if we talk about the whole world, obviously it is a big issue, and this trust can be built only based on political will and also on the standards that all countries will adopt. So it's a long and complicated process, but we should follow it.
If I may add to this, I've couple weeks ago I've attended a meeting on interoperability actually of trust services, and the whole idea of the meeting was to see if the legal frameworks align and so on. At one point, somebody raised the question, so how are you gonna force that? And talking what you just said, like there has to be political will. Nobody can force any other country to trust each other. There has to be a lot of dialogue and a lot of work done before anything can actually happen with regards to this interoperability in digital identity and trust services space.
Yeah, and I would also to add that, for example, some real life use cases can force it, because now, as you know, for example, in Germany, after 5 years of being there, you can apply for citizenship. And if it comes to Ukrainians that left our country or in 2022, we have a lot of our citizens that are now in Germany, and they would like to apply for citizenship next year. It will be big problem. So government of Germany is not ready. Internal structures are not ready to cover this amount of people. And I think it's Germany is just an example. It's about different countries in Europe. And the only way to solve it is to build these bridges between Ukrainian registries and member states registries. Because otherwise it could take years to consider this application, to prove who they are, and to solve this problem. So I think this push can be also from these real life practical use cases.
100%. Yeah. And I will say that Ukraine is one of the only countries in the trust service list, EU trust service list, which has already been a huge step in that process, I think, because, it all pretty much starts with this trust service part of it when you recognize each other's in that space. So
If I may ask for an example and maybe provide my own as well. I mean, for example, me, I live in Brussels. I'm stationed here, and I have friends all over Europe. And basically, one of the most interesting cases of this trust not surpassing borders, I would call it like that, was also connected to some inefficiency between the coordinates between the governments, and basically. Um, once upon a time, my friends, they had to travel from Germany, they're Ukrainians, they had to travel from Germany to Denmark to get married because in Germany it was way too hard for them to prove that they are not married in Germany, so that they had to book a service, like, basically like medical tourism, but like wedding tourism for basically to a country where it was so much easier and well, they created a whole package about it. In your eyes, do you remember like any kind of other frustrating things people had to do, or maybe from your own life that you also had to surpass or bypass, um, moving abroad or living abroad? Because I know that you guys also were living abroad for some quite time. Do you have any examples?
I can start. I actually had the same case in the life of my friends, where they had to travel to Czech Republic for that exact same purpose, because it was very complicated to do in the country where they were living. But I think um, the example that I can think right away was getting the confirmation that I didn't have any legal proceedings against me in every country where I lived. And I think it's like every from every country where I lived more than 6 months, and 6 months is not that long of a time, so it becomes quite a hassle to get all these and on time, and that they're accepted and valid. That was my personal experience of you know proving that I haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, I would like to add a more positive example that as a result of COVID, a lot of notaries simplified the procedures of know your customer. And now, for example, we when we started a company in Belgium called Beldoc, the service of opening a business in Belgium, we obviously opened the company to do this. Yeah, to be a registered business, but at the same time to understand the whole procedure, because we want to simplify exactly this procedure. And the KYC was already much simpler because notaries changed their approach to validation of documents. So it was enough to go through standard bank-led KYC, and we started the company. And now Beldoc also using this approach. So we have internal KYC, and now it's much better. But when I started business in Germany, sorry Germans for saying this, it was not the case. Like, because you need to be physical present, you need to pass the documents. Also, all the statute should be read 2 times, one in German, one in English language, uh, uh, allowed with the presence of all shareholders. Yeah, so it's like this traditional procedures are in place, and sometimes they are confusing because it takes time. People coming from rather different cities, different parts of the world. I think it should be simplified.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of more like, traditional approaches, basically one of the guests, previous podcast episodes, they told us about a little country in Caribbean where for you to properly prove your identity, you would have to have brought like a priest or a teacher, somebody of a noble profession, so that like, they will trust you and this person because they're known by community to vouch for your identity before the board or something. Like, this approach of proving who you are and like, what kind of documents do you need with yourself? Do we have like a, I don't know, standard unified short list, something that we would recommend maybe Alexander on like Ukraine experience, what do we need to 100% have in each and every digital wallet, like a driver license, medical information, like, how exact that should be? And for example, what shouldn't be even a part of this wallet because of some kind of government regulations and everything? Do you have a recommendation on that?
I really rely on what is going on in UEDI mostly because it's quite a sustained way to organize the infrastructure. I think first of all, ID documents should be issued only by government, and um, it serves as a foundation for all other documents, all other credential issues. Especially remote ones. So it's the only documents that is super critical that should be issued by government. Also, there are some kind of controlled, let's call it like this, credentials that must be issued by different governmental bodies. Sometimes it could be private companies, but they really prove something that could be where you can get legal advantages, you can get some benefits, as well as driver license or diploma issuance. Yeah, they are issued by maybe private university, but they give you a lot of options. And there could be also some credentials issued by private companies, like short-time credentials, and all like passage to some event, maybe, or ticket to the match, football match. All this type of credential, they can support the same technology, but with different level of guarantees, and they are kind of stored in the wallet and can be used in different scenarios, in person or online. And yeah, so now is kind of mainstream of how things are organized. Of course, there is a lot of different cases. Some of them are quite edge cases. Obviously, when it comes to cross-border approvals, and of course, there is also a lot of conflicts in standards that are used by different countries. And all these are things to be solved, issues to be solved.
Thank you, Alexander. Yulia, I actually have a question to you too about a similar subject. So basically, we talked about, like, different types of credentials, different manners to basically make sure that they're valid, different levels of trust and stuff. What about like professional qualifications? Do you have something like medical records, maybe? Because that is also a very big part of our life, and that is not always issued by the government. And so, like, how do we manage that with all of the standards, with all of the levels of trust and different providers?
Yeah, you brought up two use cases, which I think they're inherently potentially different, because when we're talking about the professional credential, I would equate them in a way to educational credential, which can be the same, can be different, right? Of course, for them, you have to have a quite high level of confirmation that this document is valid, and most importantly, that it is accepted cross border. Because this was also my story as well, when you're applying to university in different country, having a Ukrainian diploma, you have to take certain steps to make sure that this is diploma is accepted and is trusted by the institution that is receiving that diploma. Same goes with the work credentials. For example, it's some certificate that you got when you were upgrading your professional qualifications, and so on and so on. We already have an example of this kind of proof. Like, for example, in LinkedIn, you have the credential and it's proven and you can check it with the institution. But what happens if it's something that is not on LinkedIn that can be easily verified, right? That's where the credential in your wallet can potentially come into play, that can be trusted, verified. Also, you can control who you share it with. And so on and so on. With medical credentials, of course, it's a bit more complicated, because sometimes your life literally depends on that, of course, and it is crucial for you to be able to go get the medical help you need if you're ended up in another country. Of course, right now in EU, for example, you have this medical card that proves you're insured in one country and you can use it in any EU country, but cards get lost, the information gets lost, and if your doctor in your country doesn't have the access to their data, and there is no exchange between countries on this kind of data, you cannot use your prescription in the country you moved. This becomes a bigger problem for you. So potentially the credentials in the digital identity wallet and also any other credentials stored there would simplify your life in million lives and potentially support your health as well. So yeah, I think there is a lot of potential there with the digital identity credentials in the wallet, and so of course there are a lot of um, use cases that are being worked on in the pilots right now, and yeah, hopefully we're gonna get them soon.
Yeah, but let me discuss a little bit the things regarding medical records. There are really cases when people could be unconscious and you still need information about them, about some allergy, about their medical story. And in these cases, you cannot afford to be reliant on smartphone with wallet. Because obviously after the car crash, there might be no wallet, or it is needed like a verification from the person, which is also can be not reachable in the case of unconscious person. So in this case, you need like record in the databases, and if you just rely on wallet itself, probably could be broken in this type of cases. So in urgent cases, you need still interoperability layer where in some conditions people can take responsibility. I mean, a rescue team can take responsibility and get access to these records. And it comes me, it like lead us to the question that there are obvious OOTS use cases, let's call it like this, where you need internal communications without like consent of a person even. Yeah, or we should consider it like always active consent in some life dangerous cases like medical or even criminal records. For sure, we will not ask curfews about their consent to give some data to police, right? But at the same time, where there are obvious wallet cases where people will share information to some private businesses that, for example, for age verification on the website to buy some alcohol, or any other cases when we talk about finance institution where you just share information. And there is a lot of cases in between where it's not so obvious. In some scenarios, we will use wallets. In some scenarios, OOTS. Different countries can take their own approaches, but there is no general rule what technology to use. They compete, in my opinion, they compete between each other. There are very strong OOTS or very strong digital wallet supporters. They, of course, collaborate, and it should be like this, but there is no strict uh, policy or approach how to choose this or that cases, and what is better and what are criteria. So I think we should develop these best practices, how to use and in what cases what technology will be better.
So basically, for example, when we're talking about those technologies, in my eyes, they were completing each other, not competing, but I see your point. I'm also curious, basically, about the situation where, well, we understand that there are multiple standards, multiple options, multiple actors, governments, private institutions, educational institutions, medical institutions, everybody basically. Everybody has to share data so that everything works, because we have a lot of people on this earth, and it's not going to be possible in the other way around. But still, it's like, isn't it the often like case where governments or other institutions, they're literally withholding information because they have trust issues towards certain agents in different countries? Why are they so afraid? Like what are the worst case scenario that could happen, and what are the measures that usually actors on both sides have to implement so that nobody is having trust issues anymore with sharing the data that can be very crucial in many situations for citizens. Yuliia, I see you smiling.
I was thinking about an answer right away because Estonia kind of solved this matter. But to answer first why this is happening, it's very interesting because sometimes it's just legacy systems, and that's it. There's no apparent or valid reason for that to be happening. But so to say, it is what it is until a certain point. I know the case of Estonia where in I think like 15 years ago or 20 years ago even, they were also trying to solve this issue where there was this protectionism for every ministry, every entity to have their data separate, and we don't want to share, it's our data, we collected it, and so on and so on. Until a certain point where by law, they put one simple line in the law that if you have this data, you're responsible for it fully. You have to maintain it, protect it, and so on and so on and so on. Which at some point showed them that having the data is not an easy or cheap task. So if you can take the data from somewhere that is already maintaining this, it's much easier for the institution. So in the end, the interoperability layer was in place within Estonia, and there was this exchange of information set. But it's also took some time for the country to move to this idea of like, oh, actually I don't have to have a copy of that same exact set of data for me because I don't really need it. I then to have to pay for the security and data protection measures which have to be taken. There's so many things when you're talking about this. So it is. I think it can be challenging also from kind of culture, if I can say so, perspective. But in the end, it is it is much more beneficial to have this interoperability layer not only within the country but across across an agreed kind of set of actors, EU in our case, for example.
Yeah, if we talk about digital documents, they are obviously, if we consider it like point by point, they are more secure than physical. But the only one exception: it is highly centralized, and cybersecurity risks are really, really high. And this is the main factor that I think really, really um, kind of
Changes the equation.
prevent. Yeah, and it prevent the growth. So I think for sure this decentralization is very good. Interoperability practices also. Digital wallet can give more ownership on data to citizen. So building it in the decentralized way is much more stable. And at the same time, we still have concern when just one country, one node will be hacked. What could be the consequences? And in this case, we need to calculate the risk, um, adopt preventive measures, and follow the protocol in case this happens. So we need to be prepared for cases when it is happening.
Moreover, in my opinion, talking more about growth and development of this niche as it is, there's also something that can prevent, sharing the data from within its actual citizens as well. Sometimes they are not willing to participate in that as well because they might think that government is inducing too much surveillance on it. So, Yuliia, I see you smiling again. Please jump in.
No, I think it's just surveillance being a big and scary word, which is big and scary problem. It's been used quite a lot by different governments all over the world when we're talking about digital identity and any in general any interaction with the government. But of course, it in most cases starts with digital identity and getting your document. I would say that of course, precautions have to be taken to avoid that scenario. And I think most democratic governments are doing the necessary steps to at least, minimize the risks. Of course, if we're talking about cyber attacks and so on, um, it is it is a serious matter that the government has to take seriously, and most of them do, luckily. But I also think that sometimes um, there is lack of knowledge and understanding of the matters for the citizens. Sometimes there is information they don't need to know, how the backend works, how to code, and so on. But there is some information that the citizens have to be educated, proactively educated on by the state, by the issuers, and so on, for them to understand how to use it, of course, but also how to protect themselves. Because also, for example, with the wallet, we're talking self-sovereign identity, giving more power to the user, and so on. But the real need is to educate the user what to do and what not to do in these matters to protect themselves. Because you can set up all the necessary systems, all the cybersecurity measures would be in place, all the hashes, cryptography would be there, standards were followed. But as soon as the human factor comes into place, that's where you usually run into problem of identity fraud and any related fraud to your digital identity. So this is I think a crucial point where both every member state, but also EU and in general has to put the information out there, put the programs out there to educate the citizen.
What, in your opinion, should be done to improve the pace to make this uh, project of implementation of interoperability and digital credentials, make it to move even faster? So what governments should do to facilitate this process?
First, I will maybe start with explaining why it takes so long, because I think this is where the problem lies. It's not necessarily a problem from the perspective of the process, but it does slow it. The idea of European digital identity wallet came from regulation, from EIDAS regulation. It was an update in 2024 where it set the requirements for not only for the wallet but for the member states to have that wallet, and for that wallet to follow certain standards, requirements on. Um, you know, it's um, it's not about developing an app, as many might think. It's not just developing coding an app real quick and putting it out there. It's building the whole infrastructure behind it. You have to build trusted issuers, trusted verifiers, and making sure they all follow some rules, standards, and so on. So this in itself is already a huge process. Next step is, of course, setting up those use cases that citizen would use. That also takes quite some time. And we, of course, if we're talking about standards, we have to talk about certification process, which in itself is a lengthy one. But we also have to consider that there is not that many organizations that can perform that certification for the government, for the wallet, right? So maybe these sound like, oh yeah, whatever certification, don't they know what they're doing? They do. But for the entities to trust that wallet, for the entities to trust that issuer, and for the user eventually to be sure that this app that you think you're just using an app, but that ecosystem that you're using, you have to be able to trust it. On top of that, since we're talking Europe and interoperability between states and between wallets, you have to make sure that every member state is on the same level to ensure that interoperability. So the trust is on the same level. So you don't have that in one member state it's super easy to get that credential, hence it's easy to fake it or something, and a different state that has higher standard of that, and then they exchange it, and potentially that's where the conflict would happen. You'd have an influx of of credentials in one country and then moving away from different country. So this is the the question of the whole infrastructure ecosystem that has been built. That's why it's much harder to just put it out there and see what happens. Of course, there are some things that could have done faster potentially, but I think this also step-by-step process is necessary to make sure like everything is in place, because I also think from my perspective, it'd be much harder to fix it later if you just do something real quick, especially in the area of digital identity where, it's a core thing for any public service that is out there. And not only public, but private service. You have to make sure that it's done coherently and you know, let's say in a trusted manner for every participant of that ecosystem.
Thanks, Yulia. I hope that somebody who is actually working on digital credentials, digital wallets, and the systems are listening right now, because I feel it was very, very golden information. And to summarize, basically on how to launch a successful system where citizens don't feel like government forgets every 5 minutes who they are. It's better to prep the ground with communication first, to let citizens know that, well, that's not another act of surveillance, that that is actually going to help you. The digital credentials are better than the physical ones, etc., etc. You're gonna start. Also, prepping the ground, making sure that you have enough providers of those credentials and actors who maintain that, covering different parts of which citizens are interacting with the government, like medical, like educational, within the system as well. And are we forgetting anything? Any other advice for like the best ever communication way between citizen and the government in a digital way, except for, of course, competing versus collaborating with digital wallet and interoperable digital systems?
Yeah, I would say a couple of words regarding biometrics, because obviously it's an issue, especially when now we have this AI functionality that can forfeit almost every credential. So we should rely on devices, right, that are external. We don't control, as a government, we don't control the perimeter of them. So potentially they can be kind of um, reverse engineered. Something could be changed in these devices. So it's really hard engineering task, because we see that with this um, AI boom, we have a lot of different kind of vulnerabilities found by these algorithms, and also AI can produce different fake credentials and even bypass biometrics. Yeah, so it's an issue, and obviously with the digital identity, it can be really scale fast if something bad is found. So I agree with Yulia. It's very hard to change things once they have been, and if you do it in this centralized way, which is more secure, if it's flown, then it's even harder to fix, right? So this is why it's so sophisticated technologies. Also, there is a risk of vendor lock-in. If we talk about some countries where you rely only on one vendor without building substantial workforce, substantial competence on the side of government. So I think only government can take the lead. But of course, with a proper vendor engagement, multi-vendor approach, you can achieve much better result. But to delegate it in really smart way. But we saw the examples, for example, in Africa, where some countries were locked in, and there were really high tariffs on identification on every transaction. For my opinion, these transactions for citizens, if we talk about using government digital services, they should be free. It should be like a commodity. But if we talk about businesses, it could be a paid service. But the tariff policy have to be smart.
Do you have anything to add, Yuliia?
I want to say that I 100% agree, especially on the part that this public service and using your digital identity should be free for the citizen. You can put the cost on the reliant party, so the business that is using, because essentially they are the ones who need your identity. But you cannot necessarily put this. Well, you can potentially, but maybe you shouldn't put this burden on the citizen, um, because this is a requirement for them, for the citizen to share and provide this data. Of course, if you also talk about introducing a new system, imagine the usability percentage of that new system that citizen has to pay for to use to just share your data with someone. I think this would be a disastrous launch right away, for any digital identity system that is being created this way. But yeah, I mean, I generally 100% agree. And especially for the biometrics, I repeat this phrase to usually when I talk about a digital identity, you can replace your document, you can change your name, but you cannot replace your face or your fingerprints. This is something that I think every user has to remember. You cannot change well, potentially, but
Yeah.
Depends. Depends.
those drastic measures,
Yeah.
measures would have to be taken to change your fingerprints on your on your face. So yeah, I think this is something that everyone has to remember and keep in mind, of course.
Thank you, guys. I would like to finish off with another thought experiment on your side. Imagine that we're sitting here like 10, 20 years from now on. And what do you think? What kind of paperwork or just document or whatever the document do you hope your children will find impossible to believe ever existed? Like something that is okay-ish today or was okay in the past, but today we're like, why would you need a physical copy of that? That is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think the example of Dia has shown us that it could be achievable even today. Um, and when we control something, some credential, it can be also, it will not necessarily the wallet. It could be access to records in databases, but in general, physical documents will be uh, more or less
So you think
outdated.
any kind of physical document or
I
like
think.
why would you need like a physical copy of whatever something? Why?
They might exist because, as Yulia said, not all countries are on the same level. So probably they can be stored somewhere if you want to go to some country that has still not implemented it. Or also there is a democracy, and other countries can even decide to opt out from some technologies. It's their decision. So for these cases, we would need additional paper documents, but I think in general, digital copies will be protected, and I mean, digital credentials will be mainstream very soon. Like we saw it in Ukraine, and it's so obvious for us that it happened so fast, and now we already live with it. So there is no way there is no way back to go to paper copies.
Yulia?
I have two examples in my mind. First one is, I think, birth certificate. Right away, something that you don't really use maybe throughout your life, depending on the case, of course. But now it easily can be done. It's a record that is stored online and not necessarily maybe used in Estonia, for example. From the moment of birth, you can go and get your child an ID card right away. And what's the use of the birth certificate? Of course, again, depends on the level of services the country has. And the second one is actually Ukraine just recently introduced this digital version of your tax code confirmation document. And that's what I thought of as well. I since the very beginning, I had this original paper that is, barely a paper at this point. And I was kind of so glad that this essentially paper with the most important information is just the number that is there has to be an original paper printed out, right? I think this is also something that would be impossible. It's just a number. Why do you need to have a paper stamp there if it's already connected to you in the database, to your name, to potentially other information that can be used to identify you, right? But of course, as Oleksandr said, the hope is that most of those documents will be a bit of a legacy. But let's see how it develops.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for today.
Let's agree to meet in 10 years and continue.
Yeah, let's hope. Agreed.